We're going to be looking at the book of Titus for the next 3 weeks, and it's one of those books almost nobody knows anything about. You can ask lifetime churchgoers to get up and talk to us for 15 minutes about the book of Titus, and that's just not going to happen. Go ahead and put the first slide up if you would. Just kind of keep up with me as we go, the one that says Titus, and we'll go get started with that. There we go. You'll see the island of Crete there. This is a 3-chapter short letter from one man to another. It's a letter on leadership from Paul to his understudy Titus. And it has to do with Titus on the island of Crete. And it answers some real important questions, which are questions that we have today. Because Crete was not a friendly environment for people of faith. And it wasn't a place where people were very honest, and we're going to talk about that. And it was a place that really needed some help. And so Paul sent Titus to plant churches in Crete. Now, the Christian church was brand new. Nobody was raised Christian at this point. This was so new that people were either converts or they weren't Christians. So they were starting little house churches, a little bit smaller than this church, and much like we are, they're planting churches all over the place. We're planting a church up in Alberta. We're working to plant a church in Arizona and some other places. And it begs the question, if we go to the next slide, why should we be playing offense as people of faith and not just defense? You think perhaps we should be just circling the wagons at a time like this and trying to consolidate what we have, because this has not been a real prosperous season for churches. Why should we be doing that? And what makes us think that people of faith can prevail against the media, universities, and the sort of secularizing stuff that's going on? Secularization is just a big word that means despiritualization of the culture. And that's been happening in Europe for a couple generations. It's starting on the coasts here and working its way inward. What do we think we can do against that? Why should we be planting churches in a season when churches are closing? Shouldn't we try to prop up the churches that are there? See, these are the kind of things that Paul and Titus were dealing with, and they're also the things that we are dealing with here. And why should we trust untrained leaders to lead? That's another thing. So who thinks that this might be sort of contemporary now? These are the deals that these are the problems that Paul was dealing with Titus. And these are also problems we're dealing with today. Let's look at Titus 1, 12 through 13, if you want to put that slide up there. Let's read this one out loud. It's kind of fun. This is nobody's Bible memory verse, by the way. I don't think any of you have it put up on your 1, 2, 3. Even one of their own men, a prophet from Crete, has said about them, the people of Crete are all liars, cruel animals, and lazy gut. So Paul is sending Titus into a kind of a nasty environment. And here's what Paul says about it. The next verse, go ahead and put that up. This is true. This is true. So reprimand them sternly, speak to them. And it was a culture that was definitely not a culture of virtue and not a culture of honesty. I'm going to show a little picture of Zeus up there. Go ahead and put that up. Zeus was the thunder god. Zeus was the equivalent of Thor in Nordic mythology. What day is after Wednesday? That's Thor's day, by the way. We got a lot of the names of our days from the Nordic gods. And whoever has heard of the phrase knock on wood? Thor was the god of oak, and to knock on wood is to invoke Thor when you're in trouble. So if you're in trouble, you just sort of knock on wood, and that sort of goes back. So that's a pagan thing. You may not have known that, but just in case. So anyways, here's Zeus. Zeus was the main god of Crete, and the people of Crete believed that he was from Crete. In other words, they thought all the Greeks worship Zeus. Not all the Greeks. Most of the Greeks worship Zeus. And he's sort of their main god. And the Cretans said, hey, he's from our island, so he's one of our guys. So they really gave Zeus a real special sort of place in their pantheon of gods. And he had a wife named Hera. And Zeus liked to fool around with a hottie named Io when Hera was sleeping. So whenever Hera fell asleep, Zeus would go run off with Io and do his thing with Io. And basically, Hera found out, and do you think Hera was happy about that? No, Hera was a little upset about that. So guess what Zeus did? He turned Io into a heifer so she wouldn't recognize her. I mean, think about that. Turned her into a cow. So this is their role model, role model deception. And so young men would grow up trying to imitate Zeus because he was literally the role model for Crete. And so this is why we read that Bible verse. All Cretans are liars, and because that's what they aspired to. Let's be like Zeus, and Zeus was a liar and a cheat. And he did it over and over and over. So they thought, well, if it's good enough for our God, it's good enough for us. So it was an island full of that kind of stuff. Most people just slept around and never got around to forming families and just never took responsibility and got started. So this is what Paul sent Titus to fix. Think about it. Go fix this whole island. And there's like 600,000 people living on the island. And he says, well, just start some churches and let's turn this place around. And Titus is thinking, really? You're sending me out here? You're not even coming yourself? You're just sending me out here to do this? And I just learned about this stuff recently, so I'm not even that good at it. So he writes a letter to Titus. So this letter is a letter from Paul to Titus on how to do ministry, how to be a leader in a difficult setting, where people aren't knocking down the door looking for church. Do you run into a lot of people thinking, I just really need to find a church? It's not out there right now. I remember when I was a young pastor, that was the case, and it will probably come back. Church life goes up and down in America. 10% at the time of the Revolution, 1776, 10% of Americans were church members. It hit the highest in the early 60s, the 50s and the early 60s, and it's been going down ever since, and it tends to go up and down as the nation goes through its crises and the things that it goes through. It's not just one line, it's been like this. And church life has been up and down. We talked about that last week, preaching in season and out of season, during those times where there's a revival and during those times where things are not real easy for churches. Churches are closing all over the place. I can't tell you how many phone calls I get from pastors who are in distress right now because they're being blamed for the pandemic, basically. The churches are struggling because of the pandemic, and people are just going after the pastor thinking, well, if we had another pastor, then everything would be the way it was before this happened, and that's not the case. So we've got a lot of these things going on. So Paul says to Titus, I want you to fix this island. Here's what he said. I'm going to show you a picture of a bowling alley. I know I use this all the time. But you can explain everything by a bowling alley. The key thing is to keep the ball out of the gutters. What's the easiest thing to do in bowling? Throw a gutter ball. You get 100% of the time. And virtually every philosophical and theological question is a bowling alley. And you try to stay out of the gutters and try to hit some pins. And it's a game. My son Lars and I like to look at old philosophical documents from time to time and just kind of play with them. And it's fun to do. You're bowling. You're trying to get closer to the truth, and you never throw a strike every time, but you go after it. You go after the truth. And what Paul is telling Titus is, it's like bowling. Teach the people in your little house churches not to assimilate with the culture. That's left gutter ball. Let's just be like the Cretans. Let's lie and cheat better than them. Let's just be like Zeus, and let's say, well, we'll worship our God Jesus, and we'll worship Zeus too, and we'll have some cheating competitions. I mean, just assimilate with the people. The other gutter ball is to retreat into a bunker. We're just going to sit here with us Christians. We're going to have nothing to do with anyone on the outside. We're going to form a little commune here, and we're going to make sure that our people marry our people, and we're not going to talk to anyone on the outside, and we're just going to retreat into a monastery where the world won't get us. Do you see where those are two gutter balls? When you and I have conflict with people, those are big temptations, aren't they? Just go along with them, or just leave. Just depart. Those are the two most immature things we can do. The mature thing to do when we're having trouble with someone is to engage the culture. So Paul spends 3 chapters telling Titus things are bad there. He says they're all liars and gluttons and everything else, and they kind of prize themselves on that. Who can eat the most? Who can lie the most? And he's saying, you're going to confront these people. Don't go along with them. Rebuke them from time to time. But also don't form little bunkers of Christian life where people are kept pure from everything on the outside. Engage the culture, because Paul says, by the way, we're going to take this culture and we're going to win. And Titus is going, like, how are we going to do that? How is that possible? How could we possibly do something like that? But you see, we're in interactive stuff. This is important for us too. Who here has ever had a conflict with somebody? The Bible tells us go directly to that person and talk to that person one-on-one and confront the person in love and work it out. If not, raise the stakes a little bit more, but continue to engage in a positive way. That's how we grow. But the temptation is to write people off, especially if we live in a big city like we do. It's so easy. You can just divorce your whole family and never see them again because you just get lost in the crowd. You just head out and just ignore everyone else. Or we can't just go along with everyone else. Let's just talk the way they talk, to act the way they talk, and do their thing. And Paul calls Titus to engage the culture, not to assimilate, not to withdraw, not to sneak away, not to retreat. Engage the culture, but how? Let's look at this list of things I've got here. But how? Number one, multiply leaders. Ralph Moore, who is the best church multiplier in the world, I was on his podcast last month. Ralph Moore lives in San Diego, and he's responsible for planting, I think, a couple thousand churches around the Pacific Rim, Mongolia, China, Japan, everywhere, and he's really good at it. And he doesn't do it himself. He empowers people to go out and plant churches. I said, Ralph, what's the best key to finding a good church planter? He says, make sure they don't go to seminary. Because they spend 4 years studying when they could be out there doing stuff. People, you don't need 4 years of study to tell people about Jesus. You really don't. Or to form a community, or to get things going. I let Tamara do pretty much anything she wants to do. She is supposedly the associate pastor, but there's one rule. She can't go to seminary. I've told her that. You can't do that, because that would wreck who you are. And you've got to be yourself. The last thing we need is overtrained pastors. We need people to get out there and go do something, and most of you folks can do some of that stuff. Most of you folks are qualified to get out there and multiply. You see, Paul understands that we're never going to take this island of Crete with just addition. We're not going to take this island by growing a church, making it bigger. We're going to take this island by multiplying. How does nature work? Nature works by planting seeds and multiplying. We're blessed to have a kid. I don't want him to turn into a 700-pound kid. His job is to get out and multiply. So we want people to form families. It's not a matter of getting bigger. It's a matter of being multiplicative. And Paul realizes without multiplication, I'm doing the math, we can't take this island. It's never going to happen. We have to think multiplication, not church growth, but church multiplication. That's what we started doing here when COVID started. We realized that the days of big churches are sort of over, and what we want to do is plant other churches. And we're planting one in Alberta, we're planting one in Buckeye, Arizona. We hope to plant more. And those of you watching on TV, you want to be a church planter, we'll pray with you and get you started. It doesn't take rocket science to do this. It really doesn't. It takes a heart to want to do these things, and being part of a community, being willing to learn from people. That's what it takes. And if you move away from here, go move somewhere else, maybe you can start a church there. And you don't have to have a whole bunch of background, because you know what the best way to share your faith is? Share your faith story. Share what your faith means to you and how you've changed over time. You go to any 12-step group and people are telling their stories. They're not talking theory, they're telling their stories. That's super important. If you can tell what God has done for you and form a community around that experience and get people to do the same thing, that's what we're going to do on Alpha. And we have a lot of people coming to faith on Alpha because it's a place where people can talk and tell their stories. So engaging the culture, multiply leaders, and have those leaders create community. Have them start to bring people together in their communities. Avoid using force. The Old Testament, it says, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. Don't try to force the island into your way of thinking. Coercion, folks, coercion, using force, is basically immoral if you're trying to make somebody do something they don't want to do. To force people to do things. Our whole society is based on coercion is bad. And save coercion for the most extreme situations. Do you want to use coercion against an axe murderer? Yes, you do. You want to stop the person from axe murdering. But you don't want to use coercion in making people do things. We talk about being the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we talk about having the freedom of a non-coercive society. And we want our society to be non-coercive. We want it to be voluntary in its thinking. And Paul doesn't tell Titus to go out there and win votes and get into politics and make people think what you think. And if you get 51%, then you'll turn Crete into a Christian island and you'll make the other people do things. No. Long term, that doesn't work. Don't wait for the politicians to fix things. Don't expect them to. Politicians are good at one thing: getting elected. That's what they're really good at. I don't want to be cynical, but I've interviewed more politicians than you can shake a stick at on my radio show, and I got so cynical because they're really good at making people afraid and then getting you to vote for them because you're afraid of something or another. Right wing, left wing, doesn't matter. They're just really good at that. And once they get there, they don't know what to do. So to depend on politicians to fix the world, they had politicians in Crete too. Does he tell Titus to go get in the pocket of these politicians and make them do certain things and lobby for things? No, he doesn't do that. We're going to get into exactly how he does it in the next couple of weeks. Cultivate uprightness and rebuking. That seems like a weird combination. Uprightness means to act with integrity. Keep your promises. Show up when you say you're going to show up. Be on time. Keep your marital promises. Don't go run around with Io if you're married to Hera. Don't be doing these things. Don't follow a God who is going to be lying all the time. Go back to the slide with Zeus, if you would, the little picture there. Titus 1:2. Paul starts his letter by saying, "Hey, Paul, I'm writing to Titus, da 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 da, and I follow the God who does not lie." What's he saying there? We're not following Zeus. We're following a whole different kind of God, a God who speaks what is really going on to the best we understand it. We want to operate according to the truth. We want to do that, and we want to look for the truth and go after the truth. Let's go back to the list. Cultivate uprightness. We want to follow the God who does not lie, not the God who celebrates lying, and that's Zeus, celebrates cheating. We want to be the God who we're going to follow the God who tells the truth. And he tells Titus to go after hearts and minds, not after coercion and force. Show people by your example. Look at my extended family. You can look at all of them. Big extended family. And there's pockets within my extended family all over the place, Washington, East Coast, all over the place, or your family. Look at the people who are trying to be upright. Their lives are going better, and they can live by example. And people are going to want to be like those people. And basically what he tells Titus is, teach your people in your community to be people of integrity, and people will start to admire that. And they'll start to see that that's better than following Zeus. Living lives where we are people who care about people, where we love people, where we take care of people, where we work on these things. And another thing he tells Timothy is, expect to win in the long game. We're going to take this island. And mathematically, that looked crazy. There were probably less Christians in Crete at the time this letter was written than we have people in this room. And he says, we're going to take this island and we're going to transform this island from an island of people who glorify cheating and lying to an island of people who live uprightly. And don't cower when people say things like, I'm going to go cheat on my wife. Rebuke them. Say so. That's not right. You made a promise to your wife. Stick with it. I am so blessed my wife and I, that we've got two sets of parents, her parents and my parents, who stayed faithful to each other their whole lives. Who thinks that helps our marriage? That's the example they set. The example they set was more important than any words they said. And I saw both couples having a really good life. And I said to myself, I want a life like that. I want a life where I don't mess that up, where I make that work well. Expect to win in the long game. Let's look at the next Bible verse, 2 Timothy 2:2. Let's read this one out loud. 1, 2, 3. You have heard me teach things that have been confirmed by many reliable witnesses. Now teach these truths to other trustworthy people who will be able to pass them on to others. Now, does he say have people go to 4 years of school after college? No, he said teach this to someone else, How many generations are in this verse? I've said this before. Wendy knows because she's heard me so many times. Wendy has this idea that I repeat myself. I don't think that's probably true. There are 4 generations in this verse. Paul's writing to another one of his associates, not Titus but Timothy. He says, those things I told you, you tell other people who can teach other people. Paul is thinking multiplicatively. He realizes that without multiplication, we're never going to change the world. It's through multiplication, not by church growth, by church multiplication, that we're going to change the world. So those of you listening online, what I'd like you to do is I would like you to start gathering people in your home to watch this on Sunday mornings. And I want you to get a hold of me. And on Sunday afternoons, we do training called Well Diggers. And we've been doing this for 2 years, people planting churches, and you can be one of them. And you might think, I'm not qualified. People, if you want to do this, the Lord will give you what it takes to do this. And I want to invite you. In fact, I want everyone here to clap really loud for these people who are thinking about it right now. So clap really loud. They all think you can do this. It's through multiplication, not through addition, that this is going to happen. 2 Timothy 2:2. Do the math. Without multiplication, it's not going to work. We're going to play the long game here. We're going after Crete, and we're going to make it happen because Crete needs it. Crete is a mess. Crete has kids growing up with just messy stuff, and this is not the way it should be. We have to change this into an island of integrity. So some practicalities for you. I'm going to invite the worship team back up here. Some practicalities for you. Show no fear. Show no fear, and don't repeat pessimism. I believe that America is a great country with a lot of big problems. And I think we can be a lot better country. And I think the church can help make that happen. And I believe that we can make that happen through relationships, through integrity, through multiplication, through all of these things. But first we have to change our attitude. If you really don't believe that the problems in this country can be fixed, what good is it going to be to try to do these things? I really do believe that if Crete can be fixed, we can be fixed. Who thinks this country's got some problems? We got some serious problems. I have never seen more homeless people in my life, and I've been around for 61 years. That's a problem. I think we can change these things. I think we can work on these things, but we have to believe that it's possible. If you just believe things are just going to get worse and everything's going to fall apart, and every time somebody says that, you repeat it and forward the email, then you're playing for the wrong team. Paul believed he could change the island. We need to believe we can change our community and our country. If you don't believe that, keep coming to church. We'll work on you. Picture our community and nation turned around, where people care about each other, where there's abundance and prosperity for everybody, where crime starts to disappear, where people keep their promises. Who thinks there'd be a lot less need for cops if people just kept their promises and didn't take things from each other? Another shooting here this weekend. There's protests in Minneapolis again. We wouldn't need this if we had a different way of doing things. There are counties in this country where they've gotten rid of their jails because they haven't been used for years. We lived in one, Kingsbury County in South Dakota. The cop ran out of things to do. Seriously, there's one cop in the whole county. He ran out of things to do. People didn't steal each other's stuff. It's possible. Oh, things are just going to get worse. Crime's going to be people. Do you know that violent crime is half what it was in the early 90s? It's going in the right direction. Let's keep it going in the right direction. But we can only do it by creating communities that promote integrity and honesty and respecting other people's things. Push back without being ugly. When people say, oh, there's no God, I said, well, what's your highest value? That always catches people off guard. Well, goodness. Well, what's good? Just what you think's good? Where does that come from? Do you have any sense of a higher power? Try doing a 12-step group without a higher power. Good luck. What is your highest value? Everyone's got a value hierarchy. What's the top of yours? And why should I care? There needs to be pushback on some of this stuff. And occasionally, if we can push back by asking questions, by being firm, but not being a jerk. My friend Dana Hansen's got a great video series out, and he'd be glad to sell it to you. It's really cheap, but it's a bunch of videos. They're really good. And it's on a DVD, and it's called How to Be a Christian Without Being a Jerk, which I think is a great title. But how to be firm sometimes and say, no, we have to push back on some of these things. And he says in this book, rebuke people. Just say that's just not true, and we need to work on these things. Take personal part in multiplication, not just addition. Don't just invite your friends to church. Think about starting a church and a fellowship in your home. It's through multiplication, people. Do you know where the church is growing fastest right now? Is in China and in Africa. In China, the church is growing underground, little house churches everywhere. You know what they do? They get together and they do an offering. You talk about your offerings. They take an offering and they pray and they pick one person. And they say, here's how much money we've gotten. How far can you go with the train with this? And they send the person as far as that person can go, and the person's job is to get a job in that new city and start a church. It works. And they're transforming the culture from underneath. A lot of good things are happening in Africa. You've seen the zeal in Africa. Good stuff's going on there. So, take part in the multiplication. It's not about growing a church, it's about multiplying churches. And a church can be 5 people meeting in your house and watching the service online and having a meal afterwards and praying for each other. Wouldn't that be cool? A lot of you people can do that. We'd love to have you take part in that. Avoid the culture wars. People, if Christians got involved in the culture wars and won the culture wars, 49% of the people in the country would be really ticked off at us for the next generation. It's not a matter of winning a culture war, it's a matter of changing hearts and minds and getting people to be transformed into people who care about each other and have a higher set of values. And forming community that's better than just selfishness. I'm going to close with a fun illustration here. I got a picture up here. See that Doberman? I used to walk home after wrestling practice in junior high, and it was a total of 2 miles because the bus had already left by the time that wrestling practice was over. And it was dark because it's a winter sport. And I would have to walk home in the dark in Great Falls, Montana, and it was pitch black. And it was kind of fun because we started out with a lot of friends, and we'd all be walking, and one by one they would drop off. And Jim Cranick would drop off on Riverview C, and he was the last one. And right after Riverview C, there's a park that I had to cross. And the Thompsons had a dog. There was a Doberman named Zeus. And I'd walk across the park at night, and he had just gone into the house, and I thought, I'm by myself. And I was, wrestling in that huge weight class of like 97 pounds at the time. So I was this twink of a person in 7th grade, and I'd be walking along, and I would hear Candy Thompson. She was 2 years older than me, and she'd yell out, "Zeus, come home," which meant Zeus was in the park. And I would just be struck with fear, thinking, Zeus is in the park. Zeus is in the park. What am I going to do? And Zeus occasionally would come after me. But I had my gym bag, and I would to try to keep him from coming after me. I still remember, this Doberman. Here's what I want to say. Go to Crete. Go to Crete. There is not one worshiper of Zeus on Crete. And the island is virtually 100% Christian. People, it's 2022. People name their dogs Zeus and their sons Paul and Titus. Let's pray. Lord, your son said, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. This is the most resilient institution in the history of the world. Lord, I was driving on the 405 yesterday, and I saw a little flower breaking through the concrete near the little berm over there. And my money's on the flower. Long after freeways are gone, flowers will be blooming. And Lord, my money is on the church. And Lord, we ask forgiveness for a generation of wanting to grow bigger churches rather than multiplying. We've missed the opportunity to do what Paul did. We give you thanks for Crete, Lord, that's been transformed. People tell the truth there. They stay married. They raise kids. There's prosperity there. Nobody remembers Zeus. Sometimes we forget about the power of integrity, the power of keeping our promises, paying our bills, being honest at work, sticking with people in good and bad, forming communities that churches that aren't about consumerism. It's not about where can I get fed. It's about where can I serve. We give you thanks for this church, Lord, and I want to give you thanks for our daughter churches, Lord. Especially the Well at Wild Rose Country in Alberta and Grace in the Desert in Buckeye, Arizona. And the ministry Randy's putting together, Living Well. Pray a blessing, Lord, on Bud's efforts to reach out to those people and encouraging them to start house churches. And Linda Vanoy Castillo, Lord, and her efforts to spread the church wherever she goes globally. I pray right now, Lord, that you would touch people watching this live or later on. That they would get in touch with me, Lord, and get a community started. There's nothing broken in this country, Lord, that you can't fix. And your son said, on earth as it is in heaven, until this place looks like heaven, we got work to do. And we pray your resilience. Lord, give us the faith that Paul had when he talked to Titus and Timothy. Paul was certain he could turn Crete around with a trainee named Titus. And we believe you can do the same for us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.